Right now, your body is doing something you didn't ask it to do. It's been roughly 3 or 4 hours since you last ate. You haven't thought about food in a while. And then, without warning, your stomach tightens. Your attention snaps to it. Something in your head says, find food, now. You ignore it. You drink some water. You push through. But that pull doesn't stop. It just gets louder. You've probably spent your whole life thinking this is a flaw, a weakness, a lack of willpower. It isn't. That pull is a survival system older than language, older than tools, older than fire. It was built over millions of years by ancestors who faced something you've almost never experienced. Real hunger, the kind that lasted days, sometimes weeks. And what they did when food disappeared is one of the most fascinating, most misunderstood stories in all of human prehistory. Let's start with the assumption almost everyone gets wrong. Most people, including most scientists until recently, believed that ancient life was defined by constant near starvation, that your ancestors spent the overwhelming majority of their time teetering on the edge of collapse. Hungry, desperate, always one failed hunt away from death. This idea became so embedded in science that in 1962, geneticist James Neal at the University of Michigan built an entire theory around it. He called it the thrifty genotype hypothesis. The idea was simple. If your ancestors were always starving, then the ones who survived were the ones whose bodies was best at hoarding calories, at storing fat, at squeezing every unit of energy out of every bite. That survival advantage got passed down. And now, those same genes live inside you, preparing you for a famine that never comes, making you hungry when you shouldn't be, making you gain weight in a world full of food. It was a compelling story. For 60 years, it dominated medicine. It shaped how we think about obesity, about hunger, about the human body. There was just one problem. Nobody had actually checked whether it was true. In 2014, a researcher named J. Colette Burbesque at the University of Roehampton decided to look at the real evidence. She and her colleagues studied ethnographic records across dozens of hunter-gatherer populations from around the world, groups who still lived the way your ancestors lived. No agriculture, no stored grain, no guaranteed meals. They asked a simple question: how often did these people actually go hungry? The answer overturned 60 years of assumptions. Hunter-gatherers, when they lived in decent environments, experienced significantly less farming communities, not the same. Less. When Burbesque and her colleagues controlled for the quality of the habitat, the people who lived closest to the ancient human way of life were the most food-secure people on Earth. Think about what that means. The image you have of your ancestors, the desperate, starving creature clawing at the ground for scraps, is almost certainly wrong. That was not the default. That was the exception. But that does not mean hunger never came. It absolutely did. Cold winters, drought, a migration that pushed game out of a region, a season where the fruits and berries failed. Every hunter-gatherer group in human history faced this. The question is not whether they faced it. The question is what they did about it. And the answer starts long before the hunger actually arrived. Your body has a system built specifically for food shortages. It starts activating the moment you stop eating, even when you still feel fine. Within the first 12 to 16 hours without food, your liver begins converting its stored glycogen into glucose to keep your blood sugar stable. Glycogen is the body's short-term fuel reserve, a pantry. When the pantry runs low, something else kicks in. Your body shifts into a state called ketosis. The stored fat in your tissue starts breaking down into molecules called ketone bodies. Your brain switches fuel sources. Instead of running on glucose from your last meal, it starts running on fat you stored weeks or months ago. This is not a malfunction. It is the design. Richard Wrangham, a biological anthropologist at Harvard University, has spent decades studying what food meant to early humans. In his 2009 book, Catching Fire, he laid out a remarkable case. Our ancestors were not just opportunistic eaters. They were strategic ones. Cooking, which Wrangham traces back to Homo erectus, roughly 8 million years ago, unlocked enormous amounts of energy from food that would otherwise pass through the body unused. A raw potato delivers far fewer digestible calories than a cooked one. The same is true for meat, too, and many other staple foods. Cooking was not a luxury. It was a calorie multiplier, and it gave your ancestors something critical: time. Before cooking, Wrangham estimates that early humans may have spent up to 6 hours a day just chewing, just breaking down food tough enough to survive raw. Cooking collapsed that. Suddenly, the same calories took a fraction of the time to consume. Time that could be spent scouting, hunting, building social bonds, and storing food against the future. And when food began to disappear, they moved. This is the most underappreciated survival technology in all of human prehistory. Mobility. Hunter-gatherers did not wait for starvation to come to them. They had an encyclopedic knowledge of their landscape. They knew which valleys held water in the dry season, which hillsides had tubers that survived the frost, which migrating herds would arrive, and when and from which direction. Anthropologist Lee Cronk, studying foraging populations, has documented how this knowledge was not just individual, it was communal, passed down through generations with extraordinary precision. Your ancestors carried mental maps that stretched across hundreds of miles. When one area failed, they did not panic. They moved strategically to a place someone in the group had been before, to a place that had food right now. But mobility was only one layer. There was also something that modern economists have only recently begun to understand. Ancient humans had insurance, not the kind with premiums and policy numbers, the living kind. When a hunter brought down an animal, something as large as a deer or a wild pig, one family could not eat it all before it spoiled, so it was shared widely through the whole band, not as charity, as a system. Because the hunter who brought in the kill today knew that tomorrow his family might be the hungry one, and someone else would be the one with meat. Sharing was not generosity in the modern sense. It was the original social contract. You give today, you receive tomorrow. And the whole group became more resilient than any individual could be alone. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza of Tanzania and the Juhansi of the Kalahari show this system running in almost exactly the same way. Large kills are distributed through networks of reciprocity that can span an entire camp. Nobody keeps the windfall for themselves. Because in a world with no refrigerator, hoarding is not a strategy. Sharing is. But here is the thing nobody tells you. Even with all of this, the mobility, the ecological knowledge, the food sharing networks, the body's extraordinary internal fuel reserves, sometimes hunger still came. And when it did, the response was not what you might expect. It was not frantic. It was not desperate. It was deliberate. Hunter-gatherer groups facing food scarcity reduced their activity levels precisely and significantly. This is documented across dozens of populations. When food is low, you move less. You sleep more. You sit. You talk. You conserve. Your body does the same thing automatically. In a caloric deficit, your metabolism slows, not drastically, but measurably, between 10 and 20%, according to metabolic studies. Your body temperature drops slightly. Your heart rate slows. You become, without choosing to, more efficient. This is not your body failing. It is your body doing exactly what it was built to do, stretching the fuel further, buying more time. Children and the elderly were given priority in food allocation. This pattern appears in ethnographic records across cultures on every inhabited continent, not as a rule someone enforced, as a behavior that simply emerged again and again in groups facing scarcity. The vulnerable were fed first, and then there is the knowledge. Every group that survived repeated food shortages was a group that had learned, over generations, what the land could offer when the obvious food was gone. Tubers buried a meter underground, bark stripped and boiled, insects dried and eaten for protein, seeds ground into a paste, clay consumed in small amounts to bind toxins in otherwise dangerous plants. The nutritional and botanical knowledge of ancient foragers was staggering in its depth and precision. When European explorers made contact with indigenous foraging groups in Australia, in the Americas, in the African interior, one of the most consistent observations was this. These people knew things about the land that took Western scientists generations to document. They had been studying it for thousands of years. Survival had made them the most comprehensive naturalists on Earth. Now here is the part that changes everything. All of this, the fat storage, the metabolic flexibility, the communal sharing, the encyclopedic landscape knowledge, lives inside you right now. In 1962, James Neal thought your body's tendency to store fat was a relic, a bug from an ancient world that no longer applied. But the science that followed told a more complicated story. Your body does not just store fat randomly. It stores it in specific places, in specific patterns linked to ancient signals about the future. Stress hormones trigger fat storage. Cold triggers fat storage. Not eating for extended periods paradoxically causes the body to protect its fat reserves more aggressively. A phenomenon researchers now call the starvation response. Your body, when it senses shortage, does not just burn reserves, it defends them. Because for 300,000 years, the rule was simple. The shortage never lasted forever. But you had to make it through. Think about the last time you went more than a few hours without eating. The irritability, the inability to concentrate, the pull toward high-calorie food. You probably blamed yourself for it, called it weakness. But that signal, that relentless pull, is not weakness. It is 300,000 years of engineering doing exactly what it was built to do. You are not broken. You are just living in the only era in all of human history where the food never stopped, where your body prepares for a shortage that doesn't come, where it stores for a winter that never arrives, where it conserves for a famine that no longer exists. Your ancestors would have called that unimaginable luck. You call it Thursday.